The morning Master Sergeant Vic Crane took Daniela Holt off the manifest. He did it with a grease pencil and a grin, in front of 9 men who'd spend the rest of their lives wishing they had stopped him. He stood at the whiteboard in the operations tent, drew a slow black line through her name, and let the silence do the work. Then he turned so the room could see his face. "You know what you are out here, Holt?" His voice filled the tent the way it always did, big and easy, built to be heard. "You're dead air. You key up, nobody answers. You go quiet, nobody notices. That's not an insult. That's a job description." The men laughed, not all of them, but enough. Then he pointed at the supply table, without looking at it. "Idris, pull her long gun and her big aid bag off the 3 truck. She's riding in the back as a body. We've already got a medic, and the last thing I need is a 5'4" sniper who thinks she's the main character." A private first class named Sam Idris stepped forward, lifted Holt's precision rifle out of its case, and stood there, holding it, like he wasn't sure whose it was anymore. And Holt did nothing. That was the part the men remembered later, not the line. The stillness. Her eyes went to the rifle in the private's hands and stayed there for exactly 1 second, flat and unhurried, the way you watch weather move across a far ridge. Her hands didn't curl. Her jaw didn't set. She did not look at Crane at all. She breathed out, once, slow, and the breath was the only thing in her that moved. Because Daniela Holt had already done a piece of math nobody else in that tent knew how to do. She'd read the valley they were driving into off a map 3 nights running. She'd counted the high ground. She knew something about the next 48 hours that every man laughing in that room would have given a year of his life to know an hour sooner. She picked up her carbine, 2 magazines and her sidearm, and she walked out into the heat. "Stay with me, because there's a moment coming." It happens in the dark, on a radio net, with rounds coming in. And in that moment, the same loud man has to key his handset, say her name, and ask her to keep him alive. I want you to see how far this story travels before it gets there. So subscribe, drop the city you're listening from in the comments, and stay to the end, because the end is the whole point. Now, back to it. To understand the stillness, you have to go back to a mountain a long way from that desert. She learned to shoot before she learned to drive, on a gray slope in cold country, next to a man she called Pop. Her grandfather had hunted that mountain for 50 years and soldiered before that, and he taught her the way old men teach the grandchildren they trust, slowly, without praise. He used to put his big hand flat between her shoulder blades when her breathing got quick and say the same thing in the same plain voice. "Be the quietest thing on the mountain," he'd tell her. "Loud animals get hunted. Quiet ones do the hunting." She carried his voice into places that don't put their names on signs. By the time she reached that desert, she had a sniper school tab, a record 3 pages long that most of the men around her weren't cleared to read, and a second skill that didn't fit Crane's favorite joke. She was a special operations combat medic. She could put a round through a man's chest at half a mile, and then, with the same hands, open another man's chest and keep him breathing. Killing and saving lived in the same set of fingers. She never explained it. Explaining was noise. The men only saw the size of her. Crane saw it loudest of all. The exclusions started small and stayed legal. She wasn't read onto the route, brief. Then she wasn't on the range, rotation. Then her name kept landing on the duty roster on the nights the real planning happened. Crane never broke a rule. He built a wall, one quiet brick at a time. And Captain Bram Adler, the company commander, led him the way good men let bad things happen, by being busy somewhere else and trusting the loud voice because the loud voice sounded sure. Out at the makeshift range one evening, Holt was zeroing the carbine they'd stuck her with, and Private Idris was running brass detail behind her. He didn't know her. He'd only carried her rifle out of a tent. He watched her shoot the way you watch something you don't have a word for. 6 rounds slow, at a steel plate 400 meters out through heat shimmer, and a crosswind nobody had called. 6 rings of the bell, even as a clock. "Ma'am," Idris said, "how do you do that in a wind like this?" Holt didn't turn around. Wind tells you what it's doing. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. He nodded like that meant something, which it did, and filed it away without understanding it. That was the whole point of him. He'd come back to it. Holt wasn't the only one Crane kept small. There was a comms specialist named Nadia Brandt, 23, fast-talking, hungry, with a radio voice that could cut through a sandstorm. She'd built the company's whole communications plan for the Valley movement: frequencies, fallback nets, a relay through a hilltop repeater. And in the brief, Crane handed the credit to a sergeant who'd done none of it, while Brandt watched from the back. She found Holt afterward, jaw tight, eyes hot. He read my slide. Then he called me the radio girl. Holt looked at her a moment. The hilltop repeater. That's good work. If everything goes wrong, that's the only thing that'll save anybody. Brandt blinked. It was the first time anyone senior had named the thing she'd actually built. "You think it'll go wrong?" "It always goes wrong somewhere. Quiet people plan for the somewhere." So they planned. 2 women nobody was listening to spent an hour over a map under a hanging bulb. Brandt drawing comms arcs, Holt marking high ground and the one ridge that owned the whole valley, a broken stone outpost the enemy had used for years to watch the road. They didn't bond over being dismissed. They bonded over being good. Brandt would set the net so a voice could reach anyone from anywhere. Holt would find the place a single voice could change everything from. They didn't know yet they were planning their own rescue. The convoy rolled out at 5:40, 4 vehicles, into a valley the color of old bone. It was routine for 19 minutes. At 0559, the lead truck hit a buried charge, and the morning came apart. The blast threw a wall of grit across the road, and the sound arrived a half-second behind it, a flat, enormous crack Holt felt in her back teeth. Then the ridges opened up. Machine gun fire poured down from both sides, the heavy thudding hammer of belt-fed guns chewing into vehicle panels, rounds sparking off steel, snapping past, at the speed of bad luck. Crane's voice was already on the net, fast and clear. He was good. That was the worst part, genuinely good. Calling vehicles, calling fire, pushing the lead element toward a wadi for cover. Holt's truck, the trail truck, the body in the back truck, took the second charge. The world tilted and slammed. She was out the side before she'd decided to move, hitting the dirt hard, ears ringing, copper in her mouth. When the dust thinned, she was on the wrong side of the road, alone in a shallow fold of ground, the surviving trucks already grinding into the wadi 150 meters ahead. Between her and them was open ground and a curtain of fire. She keyed the carbine's hand mic out of reflex. Nothing. The blast had killed the radio. She had a carbine, 2 magazines, a pistol, a knife, No aid bag, no long gun, no net, and no one looking back. In the wadi, a soldier shouted that they were one short. Crane's voice came back over the engine roar, hard and final, doing the math a leader makes in 2 seconds with 100 rounds incoming. Trail trucks gone. Holt's gone. Push to the wadi. We consolidate. Nobody else dies in the open. Move. Gone. He said it the way you close a door. So she did the only thing the mountain had ever taught her. She got small, and she went up. She left the road and climbed, fast and quiet, into dead ground the guns couldn't reach, picking the seams in the terrain the way Pop had shown her a world away. She climbed for 11 minutes with her lungs burning, and the higher she got, the more the fight opened beneath her like a map come to life. The wadi where Crane's element was pinned, the 2 enemy guns on the far ridge, the squads moving down to finish them. And above her, 300 meters more, sat the broken stone outpost, their command post, the one she'd circled on a map under a hanging bulb, the high ground that owned everything. It wasn't empty. She counted 4 fighters around it, through the carbine's optic, lazy, certain, watching the slaughter below like men at a show. She went the last 300 meters on her belly and her elbows. The first one never heard her. She came up out of the rocks behind the sandbag wall, and the carbine barked twice, sharp and flat in the thin air, and he folded over the parapet. The second turned, and she put him down before his rifle came level. The third made it inside the low stone room, and she went in after him into the dark, and that's where it almost ended. He was bigger than her by 80 pounds, and he was waiting. He hit her like a truck, and the carbine spun away into the dark, and then they were on the stone floor, his forearm crushing her throat. All that weight driving down, the air going out of her in a thin whistle. She saw white at the edges. She heard her own pulse, huge and slowing. His breath was hot and triumphant on her face. He had her, and they both knew it. And somewhere very far away, the guns still hammered the wadi, where men she didn't even like were dying because nobody had come up high enough to see. Her right hand found the grip of her pistol. She couldn't bring it up. His weight had her arm pinned, so she didn't. She rolled her wrist, pressed the muzzle flat against the meat of his thigh, and fired. The report was a different animal indoors, a flat, hard slap that bounced off the stone walls and rang in the small room. He screamed, and his weight shifted, and that was all she needed. She got a knee in, the barrel up under his jaw, and the second shot ended it. Then she lay there, 3 full seconds in the ringing dark, one hand on the cold floor, dragging air back into her body, telling her heart to slow. The 4th fighter she took at the doorway, as he came running to the screaming, 6 meters, 2 rounds, done. Count, 4. Then she stood up in the enemy's own command post and looked at what they'd left her. A belt-fed machine gun on a tripod, fed and ready, pointed down at the valley. Crates of ammunition. A field radio, on, warm, humming with their traffic. A spotting scope on the parapet. And leaned in the corner, lovingly maintained, a scoped marksman's rifle. A long Dragunov with a worn cheekpiece. The personal weapon of someone who'd sat up here and reached out and touched the road below for a long, long time. She had walked into enemy territory with nothing. Now she had everything. She just had to take their tools and turn them around. She dropped behind the spotting scope and read the fight in 9 seconds. Crane's element, maybe 11 men, pinned in the wadi, taking fire from 2 guns on the far ridge and from a squad of 8 bounding down a goat trail to flank them. The men below couldn't see the flankers. From up here, she saw everything. She crawled to the field radio, found Brant's company net on the dial, the relay through the hilltop repeater doing exactly what Brant built it to do, and keyed the handset. Her voice came across the net clipped, flat, and cold as a winter creek. All stations this net. All stations this net. Contact report. Observer on the high outpost grid 426. I have eyes on. 2 crews served on the North Ridge. 1 squad 8 packs flanking your wadi from the east on a goat trail you cannot see. Recommend immediate east security. Acknowledge. In the wadi, every man went still, because the voice on the net was small and certain and clinical, and it belonged to the dead woman. There was a long crackle of static, then Crane's voice, and for the first time in the entire story, it was not big. Say again your call sign. A pause. Holt? Affirmative, she said. I'm here. You're supposed to be... He stopped. She could hear him deciding even now, even with everything coming apart, that he didn't want to owe his life to dead air. Get off the net. We've got this. We don't need... A fresh volley of fire drowned him out. The flanking squad reached the lip of the wadi. A man screamed. Brant's voice cut in, fast, sharp, furious. The radio girl with the cutting voice. We do not got this. We're taking fire from the east. That's her. I'd know her voice in my sleep. She built half this plan with me. Crane, listen to her. Static. The guns. A second man screaming. And then the empty channel, because Brant keyed for the medic, the company medic, who'd ridden in the truck instead of Holt, and called his name. Doc, we've got 2 down. Where are you? Nothing. Doc, status. Over. Nothing. Just the hiss of an open channel, and the distant hammer of the guns. And in that hiss, everyone listening understood the same thing at the same time, and nobody said it. The medic was not answering because the medic could not answer. For 4 seconds, the net was nothing but dead air, and dead air had never sounded like that before. That was the moment it broke in Crane. You could hear it happen on the radio, which is a strange thing to be able to hear. The static carried his breathing first, ragged, and then a sound that might have been him swallowing. And when he finally keyed the handset, his voice had lost all its size. It came out scraped down to the bone, every word costing him something the whole company could hear him pay. Holt. Just her name. First. Like he had to get past it before he could say the rest. The men in the wadi turned toward the radio. Brant went still. Somewhere, a wounded soldier stopped moaning to listen. Holt, this is Crane. We are pinned. We've got casualties. The medic's down. And you're the only one who can see the whole field. A breath, the hardest part. I need you. Take the fight. You have tactical control. Tell us what to do, and we'll do it. Please, please. Vic Crane, who filled tents with his voice, said please into a handset to the woman he'd called dead air. And the radio made his shame public to 11 men and a hilltop repeater, and not one of them ever forgot it. From the company Tiuk, miles back, a new voice broke in. Captain Adler, who'd let the wall get built 1 brick at a time. His words were quiet, and they cost him too. All stations, this is 6. Holt has tactical control of fires. Cleared hot. Do what she says. A pause you could fall into. I should have had her up there from the start. That's on me. Holt was already behind the belt-fed gun. Copy all, she said. Heads down in the wadi. East Ridge. Watch the show. She laid into the flanking squad first, the ones closest to killing her people. The belt-fed gun was a different beast than anything she'd fired that day. Where her carbine had barked, this thing hammered, a deep mechanical pounding that walked Tracer down the goat trail in long ropes of light, recoil shoving into her shoulder in a brutal rhythm, brass ringing off the stone in a bright, tinny rain. She didn't fire it like a man emptying a belt. She fired it like a surgeon, 3 to 5 round bursts, leading the bounding fighters into the rounds, the way she'd lead a duck on the gray mountain. The first 2 dropped in the open. The third made cover, and she put a burst into the rock above him, so the ricochets did the work. The squad's advance died on that trail. Count 9. East threat suppressed, she said flatly. Waddy, push 2 men to your east lip now. Hold it. I'll keep it clean. In the Wadi, Brant made a decision nobody ordered. The casualty point was a death trap where it sat, in the open mouth of the Wadi, and exactly 1 vehicle still ran. The cracked, smoking number 2 truck. Brant climbed in, alone, under fire, and drove it 40 meters across open ground to wedge it sideways as a steel wall between the wounded and the North Ridge guns. Rounds walked across the hood a foot from her face, and she drove it anyway, screaming the whole way, and lived. It was the bravest thing anyone did down low that day, and it changed everything, because now Holt had a casualty point she could protect. Truck's a wall now. Give me the north guns, Brant yelled into the net. Workin' it, Holt said. She left the belt-fed gun and crawled to the long Dragunov, and the weapon's character changed again. The marksman's rifle spoke in a single deep crack with a tail to it, heavier and slower than the hammering gun, the kind of report that makes everyone for a kilometer wonder for 1/2 second whether it was meant for them. The North Ridge held 2 crew-served positions, 410 meters and 460, and she took them apart, gunner by gunner. Crack! The near gun went silent. She rode the recoil down, found the assistant gunner reaching for the trigger, crack, and he didn't reach it. The far gun swung toward her muzzle flash, and she beat it by a heartbeat, crack, and the ridge went quiet. Count. 13. She heard Pop then, plain as if he were lying in the rocks beside her, his big flat voice with no poetry in it at all. Be the quietest thing on the mountain. She breathed out the way he'd taught her, and let the fight slow down inside her chest. That was when she got careless. And that was when it found her. She'd risen too high behind the parapet to clear the far gun. And a fighter she hadn't counted, there's always one you don't count, opened up on the outpost from a draw 200 meters out. The first burst hit the sandbags by her face, and the world turned into flying grit and the wet smack of rounds into earth and stone, that close, that loud. She threw herself flat, and a round caught the meat of her left shoulder, not deep, a graze that felt like a hot iron laid against the skin, and another fragment of split stone opened her cheek. For a long, stretched moment, she lay behind the wall, with her heart slamming, and rounds chewing the parapet 6 inches above her spine. Dirt raining into her collar, the sting of blood running warm down her face, and the absolute knowledge that if she lifted her head, she would lose it. She did not panic. She did the thing the mountain taught, and the men never learned. She got smaller. She crawled left along the wall, away from where he'd last seen her, counting his bursts. He was a sprayer, not a shooter, dumping a magazine, reloading, dumping again. On his reload, she came up at the new corner with the Dragunov already shouldered, found him in the draw, still feeding a fresh magazine, and put one round through him. Crack! The draw went silent. Count. 14. Blood on the cheek piece now. Hers. I'm hit. Still up, she said into the net, voice not rising. Waddy, status. 2 casualties consolidated behind the truck, both breathing. We need a medic bad, Brandt called back. Hold 'em. I'm not done up here. Because the fight wasn't won. The fight had one more thing in it, and the story always saves the hardest thing for last. Down in the valley, far out at the southern mouth, a single muzzle did not flash. A patient one. The enemy had a real shooter of their own, and he understood exactly what Holt understood. Whoever owns the high outpost owns the valley. He'd ranged that outpost 100 times. He started reaching for it. The first round cracked off the stone a hand's width from her head, and she knew instantly the difference. This wasn't a sprayer. This was a marksman, deliberate, dialing her in. The light was going. The sun had dropped behind the western ridge, and the valley was filling with the blue dusk that lies to your eyes about distance. The wind had come up, a steady crosswind shoving left to right across the open ground between them. She was wounded, her left shoulder going stiff and stupid, blood tacky on the rifle, and the Dragunov was not her weapon. She had no dope on it, no log, no zero she trusted past 400 meters. The shooter was at 710. She had, she discovered as she pressed her cheek to the bloody stock, 1 round left. This is the part to slow down for. She lay behind the wall in the failing light and made herself the quietest thing on the mountain. She watched, through the worn scope, the place at the southern mouth where the marksman lay, and she read the wind off the dust and the bend of the dry grass, a full-value crosswind, maybe 12 knots, pushing right. She held off into it, a hold she was guessing at, on a rifle she didn't own, with a wound singing in her shoulder, in light that turned everything to a smear. She heard her own breath. She heard the guns gone silent below. She heard the dry grass hiss, and she heard the marksman's next round come in. Closer, a foot. The man was walking his shots onto her, and he had a magazine, and she had 1 bullet. And the math of that was the simplest and worst math of the entire day. The next round of his would likely be the one. She knew it. She breathed it out. Be the quietest thing on the mountain. She let half her breath go, held the bottom of it, settled the reticle into the wind, into the dusk, into 710 meters of nothing, onto the gray smudge of a man who had killed better soldiers than her from this exact spot. She did not rush. Rushing is loud. She let the world go quiet and big the way Pop promised it would, and at the bottom of her breath, in the half-second between heartbeats, she pressed the trigger straight back. Crack! The big rifle bucked into her wounded shoulder, and the pain whited her vision, and the round went out into the dark, across 710 meters of wind and falling light. For 1 full second, there was nothing. The longest second in the valley. Then, through the smeared scope, the gray smudge at the southern mouth came apart, and the marksman's rifle did not fire again, and the silence, after a firing position goes dark, rolled up the valley and reached the outpost like a tide coming in. Count. 15 of her own hand, and another 9 the belt-fed gun had stacked in the open earlier. Call it the 24 the after-action report would list, and nobody below would ever fully believe. The number was never the point. The valley going quiet was the point. She lowered the rifle. Her hands, she noticed, weren't shaking. They never did until later. "All stations," she said into the net, and her flat clinical voice laid itself down over the chaos like a sheet over something finally still. "Enemy fires neutralized. North ridge clear, east clear, south clear. Engagement complete." Engagement complete. 2 words, flat, against an hour of thunder. Then she put down the warrior and picked up the healer. And that is the part of her nobody had ever been allowed to see. She slung the long rifle, grabbed an enemy med pouch off the wall, and went down the mountain faster than she'd come up it, to the steel wall Brant had built, to where 2 of her own lay in the dirt. The first was stable, a through and through to the calf, a tourniquet on him crooked, and she fixed it without a word. The second was 19. His name was Jonah Pike, and he was drowning on dry land. She knew it the second she saw him. The fast, shallow breathing, the strained neck, the wound high on the right of his chest, sucking with every breath. Tension building in the chest cavity, squeezing the life out of his heart one breath at a time. She had minutes, maybe less. "Pike, look at me. Daniela Holt, I'm a medic. You're going to be okay." Her hands were already moving, fast and sure and gentle all at once. The same fingers that had killed a man at 700 meters, now finding the second rib space below his collarbone by feel. She tore open the pouch, found a large bore needle, swabbed nothing because there was no time, and drove the catheter into his chest. There was a hiss, long, ugly, beautiful, and his chest fell, and his breathing eased, and the gray started to leave his face. He grabbed her wrist with a hand that had no strength in it. His eyes were enormous and young. "Am I dying?" His voice was a child's. "I told my little sister I'd teach her to drive when I got home. I promised her. Am I dying?" Holt put her bloody hand flat over his, the way an old man had once put his hand flat between her shoulders, and looked straight into him so he'd know it was not a comfort but a fact. "Not today," she said, and she went to work to make it true. She sealed the wound, checked for an exit, and found none, and talked to him the whole time in a low, even voice that never once let him hear how close it was, about his sister, the car, the highway he was going to teach her on, keeping his mind on the road home while her hands kept the road open. When the casualty bird finally came thudding up the valley in the full dark, Jonah Pike was awake and scared and breathing and alive. The promise was kept. He came home breathing, and somewhere there's a girl who learned to drive on a quiet highway because of a shot nobody thought a 5'4" medic could make, and a needle she put exactly where it needed to go. 40 hours later, they were back at the base, and the operations tent looked exactly as it had the morning Crane drew a black line through her name. Same whiteboard, same hanging dust, same 9 men. One black line, still there, not yet erased. The men were quiet now. They were quiet the way you get when the loud voice in the room has finally heard itself. Crane found her by the whiteboard. He stood there a long time before he spoke, and when he finally did, his hands came up empty and helpless at his sides, those big hands that had drawn the line, and his jaw worked twice before any sound came out. The size had gone out of him completely. What was left was a smaller man, an honest one, standing in front of the people who'd heard him call her dead air. I owe you? He stopped, started over. The words came out in pieces, restarting, each one dragged up from somewhere it hurt to reach. I left you out there. I called you gone, and I drove away. And I told myself it was the math. It wasn't the math. I'd been driving away from you for 6 weeks. I built a wall, and I put your name on the wrong side of it because... His voice cracked clean in half, and he let it, in front of all of them. Because you were better than me, and I couldn't stand to be the second-best shooter in my own company. It was never tactical. It was small. I was small, and it almost killed 11 men. He didn't ask her to forgive him. He just stood there with it. I'm sorry. The tent held its breath. Holt looked at him for exactly the length of time she'd looked at her rifle in the private's hands 6 weeks before. One flat, unhurried second. Then she gave him the only 2 words the moment needed. 2 words he'd heard her say once already, on a radio, in the dark, when he'd called her gone. I'm here. That was all. Not forgiveness, not a fight. A fact he'd tried to erase and couldn't. She was here. She'd been here the whole time. She set the words down between them and let them mean everything they meant. And then she turned back to the work. Because the work was the only argument she had ever needed. Captain Adler's reckoning was its own thing, on its own day, and it cost him in a different way. He called her to his office, and she stood at attention, and for a long moment he didn't speak. He stared at the wall behind her. Then he did something strange. He came around his desk, pulled out a chair, and sat down on it, deliberately, low, below her eye line, so the company commander was looking up at the sergeant. He closed his eyes. He opened them. He made himself arrive at his own self-knowledge in real time, in front of her, because that was the cost, and he meant to pay it where she could see. I read every after-action, he said quietly. 20-something enemy, a 700-meter shot in the dark, off an enemy weapon, wounded, a needle decompression on a kid who'd be in a bag without it. You did all of it after we left you to die in a ditch. He looked at his hands. I knew what Crane was doing. I told myself he was running his team. The truth is, I let the loudest man in the company tell me who mattered, and I never once checked his work. That's not Crane's failure. That's command. That's mine. This is on all of us, and it starts with me. He stood slowly and looked at her level now, soldier to soldier. He didn't reach for praise. He reached for something heavier and plainer. You brought them home. 4 words. He let them be the whole of it. Then he made them mean something. Because words are words until the paperwork changes. He put her in for the company's senior marksman billet on the spot, and he named Specialist Nadia Brandt out loud in front of the first sergeant as the architect of the communications plan that let one voice on a hilltop save 11 lives and ordered the record corrected. The radio girl got her name back. So did Holt. The proof that Crane had truly changed didn't come in the apology. It came a week later in a chow tent when a new junior soldier who hadn't been on the Valley movement made a crack. The same easy crack. The 5'4" sniper who thought she was the main character, and reached for a laugh the way the old room used to laugh. Crane was on his feet before the kid finished. He didn't yell. That was the whole point. The old Crane would have filled the tent. This one walked over, stood close, and spoke low, and the low was somehow louder than the yelling had ever been. You want to know who that is? He nodded across the tent at Holt, who hadn't looked up from her tray. "That's the best soldier in this company. She held a hilltop alone, wounded, out of ammo, and put a round through a man at 700 meters in the dark to save my life after I left her to die. I called her dead air once in front of a room. I'll spend the rest of my career being wrong about that out loud in every room until nobody in this army makes the mistake I made." He let it land. "You don't joke about her at my table. You earn the right to say her name. Clear?" The kid was very clear. The table was silent. And Holt, across the tent, allowed herself the one private thing she ever allowed in public. The corner of her mouth moved. A fraction, gone in an instant, seen only by Brant, who grinned into her coffee and said nothing. Private Idris was the one who closed the loop, though he never knew it was a loop. Some new soldiers had heard pieces of the story and didn't believe the pieces the way young soldiers don't, and one of them asked Idris, who'd carried her rifle out of a tent and watched her ring a steel plate 6 times in a crosswind, whether it was really true. The hilltop, the dark, the impossible shot. Idris remembered 6 rounds on a plate and a thing she'd said about being quiet enough to hear the wind, a thing he hadn't understood and had filed away anyway. "I didn't get it at the time," he said slowly. "I watched her shoot once and thought, that's strange. I've never seen anyone do that. I didn't know what I was looking at." He shrugged and said the rest the way the simplest true things get said. "Turns out what I was looking at was the person who saved all of us. The loudest guy in the room told us she was nothing. The loudest guy in the room is pretty much never the one worth listening to. I know that now." Daniela Holt cared about exactly one thing, and it wasn't the billet or the apology or the record correction. The last morning, before the next movement, she walked out to the trucks in the gray pre-dawn cold. Her precision rifle was back in her hands where it belonged, cleaned, zeroed, hers. Brant was already up on the lead vehicle, running comms checks, fast voice cutting clean through the dark. Inside, through the open flap, Holt could see Crane at the whiteboard. He'd written the new manifest. Her name was at the top of it now, in his hand, no line through it. He looked up and caught her eye across the cold air. He didn't say anything. There was nothing left to say. He gave her a short nod, the kind that takes a man a whole life to learn how to give, and held it 1 second too long. A second that carried the ditch, the radio, the word gone, the word please, and the long distance a person can travel between 2 mornings in the same tent. She nodded back. Then she turned to the ridges, going pale in the first light, and stood there a moment, perfectly still, breathing slow, hands steady. Exactly the size she'd always been, and exactly as dangerous, and felt the thing settle into her bones that had nothing to do with anyone finally seeing her. It wasn't pride. It wasn't being right. It was quieter and more durable than either. It was the simple, level peace of a person who had been exactly who she was when it mattered most, on a hilltop, in the dark, with 1 round left, and who had never, for 1 second, needed a single voice in any room to tell her so. She picked up her rifle, got in the truck, and went back to work.